Okay, well, I just wanted to start, and we may have some more join us through the course of this. I think we had about 16 or 17 on Tuesday. I think this will go in ebbs and flows as people try and get into access some of these programs. So I want to thank Noah and Natalie from Racolta Jensen, LLP, for joining us and trying to help us navigate through some of the questions that people have. And what I'm going to do is maybe if you have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself and chime in. And I'll maybe go through as we get started. But thought I might. There's actually one question I'd like to start with because I think this is a pretty important one. Well, and as everyone knows, this Ask the Expert is part of Chamber Check, which the two chambers, the Cambridge Chamber, the Greater Quebec Chamber, have formulated because we understand that cash flow support for business right now is over the next 3, 4, 5 months is going to be essential to businesses staying afloat and being ready to be ready and able to grow when we get onto the other side of COVID and start to reopen more fully in the economy. So we appreciate, we've had lots of partners from who have volunteered their time, like Noah and Natalie, to help us, give us their expertise and what they've been hearing from on some of these programs. One that came, and maybe this is Natalie and Noah, if you've heard of this one, but it's I would say to me it's a big problem if it's the case. I had a dry cleaner who, I happened to go, and I've been telling about these programs, and I said, you really should apply for the Ontario Small Business Grant Program. It's supposed to be 5, 6, 7 questions, and it's supposed to be pretty permissive, so that most businesses can get that cash flow support as a grant. He's told me that he cannot access, he's been turned down for the program because dry cleaners are not specifically mentioned in the criteria. And so maybe I'll start there. There's a second question from a sub shop just down the way from him, who when I was talking to them, said because they've accessed the CEBA program, that they were turned down for, and again, these are small businesses who have the revenue drops and everything else. They were turned down because they had accessed the CEBA program, and which makes no sense to me whatsoever. But I guess on those questions, one of the promises of the small business, so for Natalie and Noah, for the small business grant program, was that it was to be on top in addition to or something else aside from the federal programs. Have you heard that, or can you kind of?
Well, I think in our firm, we primarily focus on the Canada Revenue Agency type grants. Mm-hmm. That's what Natalie has been primarily responsible for. I know when you go to apply for a lot of those other grants, they ask you, and this is like, for instance, like even the SHRED program with CRA, they ask you, what other grants have you got from the government throughout the year? And then those can actually impact the amount of that grant. So if you have received a grant from CEBA, we in our business, well, maybe this is just not necessarily our business, but my mindset in general is like, I don't count on that $10,000 being a grant until you've actually made the repayment before that deadline. But the government does not care. They actually want you to include it in your income and pay income tax on it before you've actually earned the $10,000. But all that aside, they may be factoring in, that $10,000 amount into what they've already received as a grant when they go to apply for that grant. For grants like that, I don't know about that scale. I will often, refer people to, if it's a bigger grant, we have a group of consultants we work with who do all of our SHRED write-ups and that kind of thing, in addition to applying for these grants. For the smaller ones, I often refer them to the Small Business Center. See, Chris is here, and sometimes the Small Business Center has some great resources on those grants, especially helping them maybe with the smaller ones. But I can't really speak to that small business grant because we've been primarily living in, the CEBA, the CEWS, the CERS, and those types.
Okay, well that's helpful. I think for Art from my office and Brian and Greg, that's something that we're going to have to ask some questions on, because that's not how it was portrayed for small business. This was to be a grant in addition to and not unrelated to any other programs like the wage subsidy or the rent program or the CEBA, which effectively is a loan. So, which makes no sense, because that will exclude a whole lot of people, because a whole lot of people have used the CEBA program to begin with. So
any retailer though, like your default one that you're thinking about is with a retailer, you're thinking about getting the CEWS where that's applicable. You're thinking about getting the temporary wage subsidy. You're thinking about getting the rent subsidy because their sales have likely dropped unless they have online sales that are thriving. Those are really the main, because rent is a significant component of a retail. They pay generally the highest rate of rent. It's like, retailers, office, and then industrial. So, that's probably the subsidy I'd be focusing on for those types of businesses.
Okay. No, I think I just got a question in from Dana. Forget who it was from Bill. All right, Bill, you're here. If you're unmuted, why don't you had a question here, a couple of questions. Why don't you start with your first one, and then I'll maybe go around and come back to you for your second question.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Just 1 second. Let me just bring it up. Generally, I'm asking about CEBA, and it's in the context of wanting to make sure that what I've done by way of upload to the completion of the form to the financial institution was weird enough, but the banks do give you a bit of a hand there. But the second component, as you know, is you have to upload your documentation to make your case that you've got more than $40,000 worth of expenses, and they're very specific expenses. And it's in the context of defining those that I just want to make sure that I'm on track, because the bottom line is I want to try and expedite this application. So I'm applying as a small business sole proprietorship. We have a boutique practice. We have no employees. The folks that I work with are independent contractors, whether they're firms or whether they're other sole proprietors like myself. So originally we didn't even have a chance, because the basic criteria was based on the size of your payroll. So they changed that, which was great. So that now my type of business is on track for help. And but my question arises from confusion in the definition of expense categories. Whereas there's a category that is for wages and other employment expenses, which I don't understand why that's there, but maybe the upload is dual purpose. It's for people that are actually applying, as companies or businesses with payroll, so that they can upload their expenses that are wages in that category. But the only other category that seems to address payments incurred by independent contractors becomes confusing in my mind, and it's for the following reason. Because it goes on to indicate, it says that it's for independent contractors, and then it goes on to say required in order to maintain licenses, authorizations, or permissions necessary to conduct business. So that I don't know what that means. So
okay, well maybe let's see. Noah, do you and Natalie have enough on that to to weigh in?
So what I've found online is that employers that pay wages to subcontractors or freelancers that don't have T4 slips issued to them are not eligible to use the CEBA loan to pay those wages. So if they're not on a T4 slip or a T4A slip, they're not considered employees. The wages or other expenses they're referring to are things like wages, commissions, car allowances, cell phone repayments, things like that that you would include on a T4 as an other information box. That's what they mean by other wages.
No,
so
but
you may still have those if you're under 20,000, right?
no, I'm not talking about payroll expenses. I don't have any payroll expenses.
Yes, but the subcontractors, if they're not on payroll, if they're not on a T-slip, they don't qualify.
Well, they wouldn't be. How would a subcontractor be on a T4? They're not an employee.
I think the point that Natalie's trying to make is that subcontractors just are not included in the non-deferrable expense category. That
how can that be? That's a huge expense.
The expenses that they are focusing on are fixed overhead type expenses.
Well, but they have a category expressly for wages. So if you had a payroll, you would have wages.
Yeah,
so,
but I think what they're saying is that you either have employees which have T4s. If you don't have them, it's not an eligible expense. Is that what?
Well, then to what degree have they modified the program so that sole proprietors that don't have employees, such as my business, are able to apply?
You need $40,000 of non-deferrable expenses, which include line items such as insurance, capital lease payments, debt service obligations.
So with things like a car lease, I think that's the other part of your question, Bill, is like a car lease. Those sorts of expenses would be covered in those up to 40,000 of eligible expenses.
Yeah.
So the nickel and diming expenses, such as the cost of your phone and that kind of thing, are allowable, but the big expenses, such as what would be the equivalent of staff, but instead of paying them on a payroll, they're independent, like say the engineers that we hire and so on. They're not considered a non-deferrable expense.
They could be if they're under agreements. So do you have like a subcontractor agreement with those people?
Of course.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I notice here payments under agreements with independent contractors. So you may be able to, if you are able to supply them with the agreement that you have between the subcontractors that you're using, then perhaps they will consider including that line item. But just simply providing the invoices may not be sufficient.
Okay. So that's if you've got those agreements, Bill, I think that would be the next step with the bank, or if that goes right to a CRA, or does that go through the bank?
It always goes through the bank, and so the bankers are basically responsible for administering that program on behalf of the CRA. One thing you have to keep in mind, Bill, is that the government, especially CRA, really hates those types of arrangements. They want everybody on a T4. So, that's kind of, I think, sort of part of the bias that goes into it.
Yeah, but how do I, if I have a mechanical engineering firm or a landscape teammate on a project, they're not employees to my business.
Right.
They're subcontractors, but they're the largest kind of costs that we have. So you're saying if I can't get the sum total of my rent and my car lease and my phone and these kinds of expenses to be more than $40,000, even though I have like $500,000 worth of expenses to contractors, I would not be eligible.
I would contact and discuss with your banker, because
the bankers, they don't want to talk to you about this. At least at the TD where I deal, they say, well, we will not give you any help.
Well, because the last bullet is payments incurred for materials to produce a product ordinarily offered for sale by the borrower. If you're selling a service, technically having someone render services to you to provide a service is like a cost of sale for you. It's almost like a material for you because you don't really have like a physical material necessarily.
I mean, that's not, again, it's not explicit. It's very confusing. Like, I mean, it's just like in the case of the intervals, you know, like when I spoke with somebody that, an advisor at SEBA, and asked them, because obviously if I'm getting billings from subconsultants, they're not identical, they're one-offs.
Yeah,
so
but I think what I hear you saying, do you have contracts with them, or you have an arrangement with them? You're going to need to provide that to the bank and specifically say this.
Why to the bank? The bank has nothing to do with it. It has to be,
well, that's who's that's who's administering the program, right?
Yeah.
No, that's not. Is that correct? The bankers tell me they have nothing to do with it. They'll be advised after you upload from SEBA whether it's approved, and then they get a hold of you and they simply administer the loan. They don't have anything to do with approving it or coaching you as to how to get approved.
Right. Yeah. So they're just really the agent in this.
Yes.
In this thing. So, but you still have to send all that documentation to the bank when you're uploading it all?
No, you don't. Why would you do that? How do you understand that? It's all uploaded directly to SEBA.
I think it depends on the financial institution you're using, because I've seen it go both ways, where some bankers are taking a more active role and helping support their small business clients by doing this on their behalf.
Have you got a suggestion as to a bank that's doing that? Because the bank that I deal with, they're standoffish. They don't want to help. They say, we're not really making any money on this. We're just
so Greg, there's a 1-800 number, or I think is the place to go for, you know, in terms of getting to CRA, because there are some numbers where because if there's this confusion, it sounds to me like if you've got those agreements, it should be an eligible expense, but they're not making it easy to do it. And I hear Noah and Natalie saying depends on which bank you're dealing with, and perhaps which even branch you're dealing with.
Ian,
yeah, just put the number.
You can either upload invoices or agreements. Both are supposed to be allowable when you look at the definition. It's not just limited to agreements.
Okay. Put the wording of those two particular line items that Natalie alluded to in the chat box, along with the phone number for the SEBA folks. What I understood from my customers, and the thing is with my own SEBA loan, you know, we qualified under the labor requirements, so that was a straightforward application. But for most of our clients, from what I understood, is they were uploading it through the bank. I wasn't aware that everybody was uploading stuff through.
No.
Okay, so Bill, there's the information's in. If you just click on the chat box below, they put that wording there, and the 1-800 number, because I think you're going to have to deal with.
Well, I've called them 3 times, and I've spoken with that folks that pick up on that number, that are the advisors for SEBA many times, but that's not a bank. It's SEBA itself.
I think what they're saying is that it's payments incurred for materials consumed to produce a product ordinarily offered for sale by the borrower. So there's language in there that should cover your contract with the professionals that you're hiring. And if they're saying, no, you need to quote this and say it's right here, how do I get this? How do I upload that? Because you're excluding me on, because you know, and it's right here in the thing. I think that's what you're saying, Noah and Natalie, is that you're going to have to get to that number and say, here's what it actually says. I'm not asking the question. I'm saying, where do I upload the agreements I have with my subcontractors, because they should be eligible expenses based on what's in your own thing. And ask that question, I think is the way you're going to have to approach that with SEBA.
Well, they're very non-judgmental. They'll tell you right off the bat, listen, we're not approving this. We're just trying to answer your questions. And if it comes to anything that's technical about the upload, they'll say, we don't even know what the template looks like. Like it's bizarre. I'm telling you, it's very unapproachable. The thing about the materials category, they use the example, like if you're a farmer and you have to buy hay, that's a material that you have to buy. Now, I mean, I'd like to be able to stretch it to say, well, the services that we need in order to complete a project are like materials, but how are you supposed to know that? That's what I'm getting at. It's very, it's not explicit.
Well, I think you're going to try and have to take some of this language and go to CEBA with exactly this question and back to your bank and say, and maybe it's involves, you know, booking an appointment with the manager and saying, I'm not getting any answers. And I'm told I was asked or asked the question. And you can say that you were, you know, you've consulted with, you know, or been in a conversation with the chambers and an accountant. And push. You're going to have to push to get past the answer you're already getting from both your bank and from CEBA, because it looks to me like what Noah and Natalie are saying is the language is right there, and someone is just giving you a pro forma answer, and you're going to have to push both your bank, probably to your bank manager, and insist that they give you an answer, because if you're a client of theirs, they should be helping you through that, or the CEBA number, the 888 number from CEBA.
You should expect nothing less, Bill, than to have the government make something very difficult for you to apply, especially when they're giving you money. So, you know, but if they're suggesting that these contracts that you have would validate as a legitimate expense, then they need to be able to provide an opportunity for you to upload those contracts so they can adjudicate the claim effectively. So it's got to be somewhere on there, and that 188 number should be able to, that person should be able to say, oh, you upload them here, or you just, you know, you put it in with everything else.
Yeah. And the bank too. I would be not just calling the first person at the bank. I'd be booking an appointment for a phone call with the bank manager. Because if you're doing business with a bank and they're getting the BS answers you are from them, I would be going to the manager, you know, as the next step. Listen,
okay, thank you.
One of the best pieces of advice I got on situations like this was in a tax disputes professional development class that I did. And they said, when you are communicating with the government on things that are subject to interpretation, you should be, you know, item by item, lining out in a paragraph by paragraph format how each document relates to the interpretation that you are. So if page 1 is a contract with a subcontractor and, you know, they're arguing it should not be included, you're saying, I'm including this agreement because, you know, tying it related directly in here, you know, the payment for this service is to produce a product that I ordinarily offer for sale as in accordance with the CEBA requirements.
Do you know, is there ultimately then, after you've applied, let's say they reject mine now because I uploaded invoices and they say, well, that's not, do you know from experience, does somebody actually then, like, is there an educator or an examiner that you can actually then communicate with and try and make these arguments or have these discussions? Or is
I'm not certain. I have had 2 or 3 clients who have gone through this route in the process, and they had to make 2 or 3 applications. In one case, and I'm only going by what I hear from my client, because these are not loans that I can interject with my client to help them get with the banker. So it's completely word of mouth from what the client says to me, but the client told them their banker helped them with one of them. The other guy said that, you know, the CRA helped him. I think really the important thing is for you to have a cover letter, not just uploading invoices, because if I'm looking at a series of invoices that are being submitted and it's got, you know, no cover letter or just a cover letter that says, here's all my expenses, you know, you're not, I may look at
well, if you put any handwriting on any of the documents to explain them, they trash them.
Yeah, I think
there's no category for upload of descriptive or explanatory. Like to each of the three folks I spoke with, I said, wouldn't it be good if you had, and I understand that this stuff is done very quickly and it's evolving, but wouldn't it be good if you had a category of upload that is so that you can communicate or you can explain things? And they said, well, that's a good idea, but it's
okay. So Bill, I'm going to move on. We've got some others that have some questions, but I think the point here, if you go into the chat box, the language that you need to be saying both to your bank and to the CEBA is right there.
Yeah.
What is the chat box?
Okay, at the bottom of your screen there, if you're current, it'll say chat along the bottom.
Oh, I see it now. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I just uploaded the link. Sorry. The link has a document upload guide. At the bottom, it will actually tell you between pages 14 to the bottom. It'll say for wage, these are the types of documents you can upload. This is what they have to include. And it breaks it down for each and every applicable line item. I don't know if you've read it, but it's there if you're worried about maybe not having enough detail.
But I don't have any wages. That's exactly the point.
We're back. We understand it's not wages. There's the line here is independent contractors and fees required to maintain licenses. What you have to do is submit those with it. And what I think Noah's saying is a cover note saying, here's why I'm applying for them, because I have to hire the mechanical engineer to do the report so I can complete the contract that I'm doing. I think that's what you're saying, right, Noah? Is to say take those expenses with a cover note that you can then upload, and you have to have that conversation with your banker and have them help you walk through that.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna tell them that the chamber, Ian, made me a great suggestion.
You can feel free to do that, because if I got the bullshit answer, if I got
the small business advisors tell you to go fly a kite.
And I'm suggesting to you, Bill, that you don't want to talk to the small business advisor. Call your bank and to ask to speak to the branch manager and say that you've got no support whatsoever from the bank, that you're a customer, and you were told by Ian McLean from the chamber and some professionals that were on Ask the Expert that these should be eligible, and I want someone to help me walk through this from the bank.
Yeah, or at least give some basic interpretation, because it's confusing.
Getting a BS answer from a small business advisor who doesn't want to take the time is not an acceptable answer from your bank.
And just as an example, Ian, the first rep I spoke to, I've gone to 3 different branches. The first one I spoke to said, because my home branch wasn't being helpful at all, they said, listen, just upload your tax return from 2019. I said, well, what the hell is that going to do? So all 3 reps that I spoke to when you call that CEBA line, they all said, why would anybody give you that? That's absolutely bogus.
Yeah, I think go to your home branch and talk to your branch manager. Tell them that all the BS you've been going through, you've got this information all in the chat box. So you'll be able to say, here's the information right here. This is what the professionals are telling me. Who's going to help me? You tell me who's going to help me walk through this at the bank. That's what I would be doing. Okay. Seymour, I see you've been patiently waiting there. I know you had a question. Do you have anything you want to kind of raise with Noah or Natalie?
Yes, hi. At the risk of being told that I didn't look too deeply into it, but I did read a little bit. I'm a property owner. I own a small building in downtown Kitchener, and it's been vacant, partly vacant, for over a year right now, and the pandemic has made it difficult to lease out. We've just recently managed to sign a lease, but I'm looking specifically. I don't know. From what I've read, it doesn't appear like I would be, as a building owner, eligible for any of the business relief grants necessarily, but property tax, I did see the property tax and energy cost rebate grant. Let's look at the property tax. Is this something that I would be eligible for? Again, owning a small building, which has been partially vacant and difficult to lease, and basically loss of rent as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, we haven't done any of those because we don't focus, our business is mostly financial reporting and taxes. And so we've been doing mostly subsidy applications and CEBA loan applications. I haven't done any property tax or energy grant applications for anybody, but I could look into that for you. I would think maybe you could apply for the CEBA loan if you've got property taxes in excess of $40,000.
No,
property taxes plus insurance of over 40,000.
No, our expenses are far lower than it's quite a small building. Yeah.
But Greg, maybe Greg could weigh in. We had a question about this. Was it in your session on Tuesday or maybe last week from the fella from, I think it was a hotel, but there is a process, and again, they make nothing easy, but I think that one is eligible for a property tax and the energy cost, like your utilities cost, right, Greg?
Property tax and energy rebate program starts as of November the 23rd. So it doesn't predate that, simply because the area in which your place has to be must be in either red or lockdown. And so we went into red in the region of Waterloo on November the 23rd. So it's going to be prorated, obviously, what happens, but it's a fairly simple form to go on and fill out. The example that we had last week was in a hotel where the hotel was still open even during red and lockdown, because they're considered an essential service during a pandemic. But the restaurant and the associated conference areas that they had there were completely shut down when we went into red, and thus now into a full stay-at-home order. So there was a calculation that had to be done. So what you will be applying for, you will actually be asked for your revenue prior to back to April 2019. So that will be your offset. So my assumption is maybe in April 2019, you might have had a tenant in there, so you had full revenue coming in for the building. And then your comparable, of course, will be the current months, and then the amount of energy and tax, property tax that you pay on an annual basis, and then they'll prorate it. Actually, the energy gets very confusing, because obviously we know that your energy costs are going to vary month to month. It's going to be a little bit different. So you actually have to put that in, and then they go through another process to evaluate your claim, and then they send you the check back. But you should have all of that up to date anyway, from November the 23rd. Very easy program, ontario.ca/COVID support.
Yeah. That sounds similar to the rent subsidy, but for the province, administered by the province for property taxes and energy.
And I think it's back to the thing that I raised at the beginning, is these things are supposed to be separate, right? Meaning the federal programs do not depend on the provincial programs. And so that's what they at least said. And I think what we're discovering is that might not be the case, particularly with the small business support one being dependent on whether you had a CEBA loan. And to Noah's point, because 10,000 of that is forgivable, they may be asking you to include that, which is not what was.
Yeah, I was only speculating on that.
Yeah.
I've not.
But if they're excluding people, we're going to dig into that, because we need to understand that one, if that's the case, because there's no reason why a small business like a dry cleaner. Well, dry cleaner is not explicitly written into those eligible, but a sub shop that's, I know why it would be excluded, and in their restaurants and those types of things are included, makes no sense. So we're going to dig into some of these things that have been raised and ask those questions of the province.
The sub shop is directly written in here as restaurant and bars, no?
Yeah. Yeah, but he got turned. They you know, again, it was turned down. Both of them were turned down, and so I think we need to dig into as to why that would be. But they both specifically mentioned the CEBA loan as being the reason they were turned down, which doesn't make sense because they're supposed to be, like, the province never said it's dependent on whether you've got any of the federal supports. This was supposed to be in addition to. Greg, have I got that right? I mean, that's the way it was told to us.
Yep, and they got to just stop getting people to write these legislative regulations that work in offices with no windows.
Yeah.
You just don't see the
I think the other thing is calculating revenue loss. They may have made errors in that process. Like, I can tell you, we had quite a few customers who thought there's no way it will be eligible for the wage subsidy, and then Natalie has worked her magic, and I think, you know, in total, I think we've probably recovered like $3 million at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay.
Yeah, because there's two different ways of calculating the wage subsidy, right? You can use
it's actually three:
revenue and cash or something like that. It depends.
Yeah, there's revenue year over year, or revenue January, February, or cash. So there's like three different ways to split that.
Which, of course, every small business knows how to calculate all those things, and we just, you know. Yeah. Okay. I see Christine. Is Christine on there? Yeah, I see. Christine, did you have anything you wanted to raise with Natalie or Noah? I'll take that as still on mute. If you're talking, you're on mute, Christine. Who else? I don't see Jan here. Thomas, I see you were on the line. Did you have any questions or comments?
No, thank you. Just listening.
Okay. Now there's a couple of others that questions from that I think might be useful from previous sessions. Again, maybe this is one's talking about the question was, and I think we've put this on the website, is a page with all the information and the links for these grants. And I think, you know, as I think just this discussion illustrates, there's nothing easy about any of them, even though they're supposed to be business friendly. But maybe Noah and Natalie, tricks of the trade. I mean, going to these to the links and looking for the information and trying to navigate your way through. What's your, you know, I guess, for lack of a better term, what are your best tips for any of the specific programs if they're more complicated, or advice on how to make sure when you hit these roadblocks, which everyone seems to before they're approved? You want to take a stab at that, Noah?
I think I'll look through that one to Natalie. She's probably the best person to answer.
Oh, thanks, Noah. So I always start when I'm looking at, even if it's client specific, I start at looking at the eligibility requirements, because if you're not eligible, there's no point in continuing reading. So I'll look at their eligibility requirements, and normally what they have below is they have examples of businesses that would be eligible. So specifically wage subsidy or rent subsidy, it will lay out who can apply, and then it'll say you have to meet one of these conditions. And it says you have a CRA business number on this day. You have a payroll account on this day. So once you hit one of those, you're good. You can stop reading. You don't have to read the entire thing. And you move to the next section. So like, I always look for those keywords, because CRA likes to say at least one or more than one or 3 or 4. So check for that. And it's usually bolded at the beginning of the eligibility criteria. And then it kind of walks you through and says, well, what kind of expenses or what kind of items can we include? So I kind of will print that and have it beside me as I'm looking through my own financial records or a client's financial records and say, which of these do I even have? Is it worthwhile for me to apply for this program, or maybe not? The next section, if you're dealing with wage subsidy or rent subsidy, the drop in revenue can be a nightmare for some people. As Ian was saying, not everybody knows how to do it. So if you're using a standard accounting software, it's not difficult because they have built-in reporting functions. But if you're not, it's a little more difficult because you have to calculate that by hand in most cases. So if you're doing it on, we like to call it accrual basis, which basically means as events happen. So as I invoice a client, not as I receive the cash, then you'll go by your invoices and you'll take your invoices and transfer that information into Excel or whatever you feel most comfortable with. And when I'm doing the rent subsidies and the wage subsidies, I actually prefer doing it all at once. So for a lot of the clients I've been getting this month, I'm doing 12 months all at once. So I'll kind of have everything tracked and compare each column. And that will give me an idea of which months they apply for all at once. And then it's not a matter of I'm missing things or I'm inconsistently applying it month over month. So the biggest hiccup for revenue that you will find with wage subsidy and rent subsidy is once you choose a method, you have to stick with that method until they tell you you can change it again. So if you applied March, April, May, June, you had to apply with the same method for all 4 of those periods. But then they said, well, as of July, you have the option of changing which way you want to go, depending on what's best for you. Now, when you changed it in July, December is here and you still have to use that same method. So there's no way of knowing in July which one's best for you in December. You kind of had to make an educated guess at that point. But if you kind of waited until now, if you do it all at once, you can look and say, overall, this is better for me at the very end.
I think that's important, is that you can apply retroactively to the beginning of these programs, right? So even if you haven't done it now, there's the opportunity to do that. And that allows you to look back and, to your point, figure out which one would be best financially for your company, whether that's on the wage subsidy or the, any of the programs.
So, and I was about to say, for periods 1 through 4, which would be wage subsidies from March 15th until I believe it's June 7th, those are all due as of January 31st of 2020. So you have until the end of this month to get in the first 4 periods. After that, they're all due 180 days after the last day of that wage period. So if your last day is August 29th, you have 6 months or 180 days from that date to file the application retroactively.
So the next 10 days are pretty critical if you haven't applied, to make sure you get those periods, get them in, and at least get the application in, which is pretty important, and then doing it on a regular basis. And I guess that's the point, is we want people to be applying for these programs as much as possible. Natalie's point, assuming they're eligible, because it's putting cash flow into business hands, which is the important part. You were going to say something there, Noah? Or just nodding? You're on mute.
It's really the importance of that deadline, and because it's really your last kick at the can. I guess they don't want people 2 years from now saying, sometimes you switch account, like maybe you switched accountants and the accountant's like, hey, did you get this or that 2 years ago? And so they don't want people doing that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now I see Ruben. I didn't go to you. Ruben, do you have any questions, comments, or things you want to raise? Don't see Ruben unmuting. Christine, I'll go back to you one more time. I know you've been listening in the whole time. Anything from your side?
Maybe
okay.
Natalie, if you've, I know, well, at least I've not been aware of many that we've had actual issues with the filing itself. Like most of them seem to have gone in successfully and come out, within like 5 days. Have you had any issues with any of them that maybe some of these guys might have if they're trying to do themselves? And how did you resolve any of those?
So for us, all of the wage subsidies, and I think this is just a CRA default, all of the wage subsidies, as long as you use their calculators, calculate out pretty accurately. It's just mostly data entry and gathering the right information to put in. So I have found that the CRA accepts all filings. I've never had one get kicked back to me. That being said, I'm sure this program will be audited, and it's going to be audited probably next year. So the supporting documents you use for your calculations, if you're using the templates off the CRA website, keep a copy with that schedule and keep it with your payroll records along with the filing confirmation form. And if you're doing it on someone's behalf, their consent form, that way if you get audited, everything you need is in one place. I posted a couple deadlines to the chat box as well. So it just, again, has the period 1 through 4 deadline of January 31st, but then it also mentions the CEBA loan and expansion deadline. So the deadline to apply is March 31st, 2020. Once you get that money, you need to actually withdraw it from that operating line in order to qualify for the forgivable portion. So if you qualify for the $40,000, but you never actually withdraw that money from that operating line, you won't get the $10,000 as a forgivable income to you.
For God's sakes, cash the check, people. Yeah. Cash the check.
March 31st, 2021.
Yeah. Listen,
2020.
I'm still operating in 2020.
Yeah. Listen, I wanted to, with Greg.
I have a question. I have a quick question.
I was just going to you, Greg. I was just going to you.
The CEBA loan, original CEBA loan, $40,000, didn't have any hooks tied to it necessarily that you had to spend the money right away. The second tranche of it, when they added the $20,000, then they changed the whole program where you actually have to spend it, et cetera. Some people were getting the original and kind of setting it aside as a nest egg just in case they needed it going forward. The second one, you actually have to start spending it. Does that mean that if you never applied for the second $20,000, you're still under the original rules, or have the rules changed on the $40,000 that you originally got as well?
I think regardless of when you received the loan, they're expecting that you take that money off the operating line, at least put it to your operating bank account, and then put the $30,000 back in. They just want to see the full amount of the $40,000 being charged that operating line, or the $60,000, before they're willing to forgive a part of it. Because otherwise, they're basically saying, you didn't actually need this money, you didn't actually use this money, therefore we're not going to give you anything for free.
Yeah, no, and I think we recognize that, but
I'm very unsure of how that will be audited. I think there's going to be a lot of audit methods for the other things. For instance, like the wage subsidies, where you could probably compare somebody's HST filings for certain periods and then validate that they're down 30% or more for the first 4 periods, or that the revenue is down for a certain period of time beyond that, based on matching up the HST filing to their CEBA loans. They have started actually auditing the wage subsidies, but Natalie did such a great job. She's probably not aware of any of them because hers were all perfect. But but I've seen some of the letters that have gone out just on LinkedIn and stuff from other tax professionals. But so I think those will probably get audited first, because they, for the most part, in my experience, have represented more money than even the CEBA loans. Like, some of our clients have got on individual applications over $100,000 on just one period. So some of them I think that will be the most heavily audited. I don't know how they will audit the CEBA, probably just looking at the bank activity after you've drawn the money out. There's certain no-nos of what you're to do or not to do. Like, if you took the loan out and then just dumped it in the stock market in April, you probably had a nice big return on that money, but I don't know how pleased they'll be if they ever go back and look at that. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, you know, somebody could go out and buy a new car, I guess, if they needed a new car. And
Well, if you do, you should get a Honda.
yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Okay, listen, folks, we're almost at the end of the hour. I want to thank Noah and Natalie, and we appreciate all of our sort of experts that are stepping to the plate and helping all business, but in particular, our good friends of certainly the Cambridge Chamber and the Greater KW Chamber. We appreciate your time and taking time out of your schedule to help us. This will be, we keep these recordings, Greg, in the Chamber Check on the website. So if others of your colleagues want to listen in, each of these are recorded and are sitting there. Our next session will be, and I have to apologize for his hair, but the next session will be hosted by Greg. On Tuesday. We're hoping he's going to get a haircut before that happens, but you're on mute, buddy. But thank you.
Where am I going to get a haircut?
Hey, just come over to my place, Greg. I'll do it in the backyard.
Yeah, you've got some experts there that know how to keep it nice and short. But thank you to everyone for listening in. I hope it's been useful. Remember that this is every Tuesday, every Thursday. So if you've got colleagues, you got other questions as you're going through, by all means, you know, feel free to join in every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 o'clock. Information that's in the chat box, and Greg's going to do this because I have no idea how to do it. We're going to take all of that information and make sure it's in the chambercheck.ca on our information page with the programs, etc. Because I think this is pretty important information and wording to the issue that Bill and others are having when you can take some of these specifics and go to your banker or on those phone calls to try and get through. And I would just leave it with, Greg's pointed this out, and I think you're hearing from Noah and Natalie is, you know, unfortunately, I wish it wasn't this way, but it is. It may take 2 or 3 times to kind of make these applications and get the information and learn from where the mistakes or the gaps are in those applications. But please do, you know, keep working through, and so some of this information could be useful in the next time you apply. And once the application's accepted, it's actually pretty easy because the next periods are it's the first one that's always the big problem. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and we'll be back here on Tuesday at 2 o'clock.